All right, Lisa.
Thank you, Jefferson. Good afternoon, exhibitors. This is Lisa Girardi with the Chicago Dental Society, and it is my pleasure to introduce you to America's leading expert on exhibiting productivity and performance. He is our trade show expert of choice who's created our Exhibitor ROI Center and leads the E3 Exhibiting Effectiveness Evaluation Program, which we will make available during the Midwinter meeting. Please join me in welcoming Jefferson Davis.
All right, Lisa, thank you. And again, thanks to everybody who's on this webinar. You know, it is so awesome to be working with a great organization like CDS, and especially Lisa, who, as your exhibits manager, really goes to bat to make sure that the meeting is delivering a lot of value for exhibitors beyond just renting you space and sending you that service kit, telling you all that stuff you have to do. Lisa's a big champion for exhibitors, and you know, the investment that they make in the Exhibitor Success and ROI Center and the ESRC, which we're going to be looking at here in a minute, are all for you. You know, on trying to put the right information in front of you at the right time frames in the show execution cycle to help you plan, prepare, promote, execute a world-class exhibit that delivers serious value for your company. So this is part of the ongoing educational program, which is the centerpiece, is the Exhibitor ROI Center. You'll see a screenshot on this on the screen right now. We've got several live and replayable webinars up there, a whole series of downloadable articles. We've got standout exhibit reports. We've been at the show the last 3 years and took photos of booths that are really executing at a high level, and there's downloadable tools. So you want to make sure that you share, bookmark and share the page, and be sure to access it frequently. Let me take you and give you a kind of a quick view of the ROI Center if you're not familiar with it. It's located on the Midwinter meeting site under the exhibitor section, and you'll see a lot of stuff up here. For those of you that are new exhibitors, we've got a web briefing coming up on December 13th specifically for you to walk you through our onboarding program. Got a whole series of articles here that are very single focused in nature. We've got webinars up there, and we have 3 years of what we call outstanding exhibit reports. So if you want to learn how to execute a world-class exhibit, the answer to almost any question you might have is on the ESRC, okay? So let's get back into our content. And today's subject matter is really an important topic. We're going to talk about how to better meet dental professionals' needs through in-booth education, demonstrations, and presentations, okay? So let's start off and step back, from our role as exhibitors, and let's think about what an attendee goes through, when they go to a big meeting like the CDS Midwinter meeting. You see this road sign up here with all these different views here, right? So many places that they could go, right? And so the main thing to think about here is that attendees, when they go to a large meeting like this, they're time pressured, and they truly have overchoice about where to spend their time. And they're really selective about what exhibits they visit and how much time they even spend in the exhibit hall. And so I think the major question for all of us to ask is, as we stand off and look at our exhibit through the eyes of an attendee, is it adding value to their overall event experience? I like to call it a worthy destination. Have we really built a destination worthy of the attendee's time? So that's kind of what we're looking at. And one of the ways to think about this is to step backwards and then really ask yourself, why do dental professionals go to trade shows? They're busy at their practices, they've got a lot to do, and yet they carve time out of their schedule every year to attend. So really it comes down to 3 big reasons. Number one is learning. And, obviously they're continuing education and getting credits, but the learning is in the exhibit hall too. And each one of us as exhibitors should view our companies, our products, our services as an adjunct to the formal education that's happening at event. And second is networking. It's the gathering of the dental tribe, right? It's kind of the place to go rub elbows with colleagues and, um, you know, suppliers and subject matter experts and you, exhibitors. And third is shopping, sourcing, purchasing, or revalidating existing buying relationships. And here's the thing, right? We don't really know for any individual attendee, we don't know how they rank these three reasons in terms of the order of priority, but we do know these are the big three reasons why they attend. So I think what each of us should be asking ourselves is, you know, the way we design and execute our exhibit, how well is it addressing these needs? And second, what specifically are you doing to address learning, sourcing, and ultimately networking needs? If you'll design your program around these three, you'll have a balanced approach to your exhibit, which will make you stand out from the crowd and which will help you attract a lot more dental professionals to your exhibit. So let's talk on some ways. So what are some things, practical things that we as an exhibitor can do to better meet attendees' learning needs? Okay. So number one is really stay up to speed, up to date in terms of what trends are impacting your customers, you know, life, right? And how do your products or your services speak to those trends and talk about those trends in your marketing, talk about those trends in your exhibit. You know, there's a lot going on today with insurance companies and getting claims processed faster and, you know, with government regulation and being in compliance, and there's a, you know, and patient care, you know, there's a big shift from the like independent solo dental practice to the corporate practice. And these are all creating challenges for dental professionals. And if you have products or services that speak to these needs, then really stay abreast and tie those needs into your exhibit, tie those trends into it, and they'll come running to your booth. Think about practical takeaways. When someone walks into your exhibit and walks out, what are they going to know that they can take back to their practice and apply, right? And then design the exhibit experience around transferring that knowledge. Be very precise about how your services, your products help them kind of tie in and respond to these trends, and also help them run their practice more efficiently, whether it's in patient care or practice management or whatever, right? But be very specific. Don't be vague about, you know, how you can help. Provide hands-on, minds-on experiences. They come to trade shows to do a lot more than they can do on your website. So you want to make sure your exhibit has something physically and mentally immersive, engaging in it. Number 5, technology. There are so many ways to integrate technology into your booth, and I'm going to show you some really cool examples and share a few case stories in today's webinar. But there's technology could be as simple as an app on a smartphone. It could be a tablet. It could be a computer, a video screen. It could be an interactive touch screen. And you can go all the way up to the latest and greatest in terms of augmented reality or even virtual reality. Technology is a very strong pull to an exhibit. Make sure that, you know, there's content that they can take away. They walk out of there physically with something in the hands. Everyone's saying people don't want to take stuff, but if it's important to them and it's relevant to them, they do. And so checklists, white papers, case studies, industry intelligence reports are all things that you can bring into your exhibit to add a lot of value and help meet people's learning needs. Those of you that have medium or larger booths, one of the big trends we're seeing on show floors today is space for peer-to-peer discussion within the booth. Sometimes it's just the high top round tables. You know, sometimes it's a more formal area with comfortable seating and beverages and maybe food. And sometimes it's even building like table topics in your booth. But those of you with medium to large booths can really take advantage of augmenting peer-to-peer discussion in your booth. And then as you think about your exhibit and you promote why they should come to your destination out of the 700-800 other companies at the show, make sure 4 key words are emphasized. What will they see? What will they do? What will they learn? And what will they get? And number 9, here's one that a lot of exhibitors overlook. You should spend some time looking at the educational sessions, the schedule, the roster, and ask yourself, which of those topics, which of those sessions directly relate to what you do? As you promote to drive traffic to your booth, and as you engage visitors in your booth, point them to sessions that tie into what you do. One of the best attendees you'll ever have in your exhibit is somebody who just went into a scientific or a practice management session and comes back to that exhibit floor and their mind is buzzing and wide open about the topic. So, make sure that you are emphasizing learning in your booth. It's really, for most attendees, the number one reason why they're coming is to learn. Okay. Now, what about shopping or sourcing needs? Well, number one, make sure you feature what's new. New is a magnet. If you were to stop 10 attendees at random as they enter the exhibit hall and ask, why do you hit the exhibit hall? I would bet you 9 out of the 10 of them would say to see what and who is new. And a lot of you have new stuff, but what we've seen on the show floor over the last 3 years is that we're not doing a very good job of calling it out in our exhibit. And so if you have something new, that should flash right in my eyes when I get within 10, 20, 30 feet of your booth. Feature what's new. Okay, your demonstrations, if you're talking about making a process more efficient, if you're talking about saving either clinical time or staff time or practice management time or money, find a way to demonstrate it and prove it. Show them how you do it. And I'll give you some ideas as we go on. Interactive calculators are often a really cool way to kind of get people to engage. And sometimes they're handheld and other times they're a touchscreen in your booth. How many hours could you save if this instrument or this piece of equipment cut the time to deliver the procedure by 15 minutes? What would that mean to you in time savings and money savings over the course of a week, a month, a year? There's a lot of cool stuff that can be happening here. Some of you do business financing and the ability to, focus on, should you buy or should you lease? And, the financial savings on both. So interactive calculators. Competitive comparisons, be truthful, be honest, be respectful, but, they're not experts in buying your product. You are, or that's what you do. So no harm or foul in going, here's 10 things that you should consider when purchasing this type of product. And here's how we stack up on these 10 things. And oh, by the way, here's how we compare to our top 2 or 3 competitors. Number 5 plays into number 4 is, people don't know what they don't know, and they're very fearful of making a bad decision. So if you'll think about what are the critical questions that a buyer should be asking as they think about your type of product or service, and be the one to educate them on how to make an informed buying decision, you'll gain a lot of credibility, a lot of goodwill, and you'll strongly differentiate your company. The 5 most important things that a dental practice should consider when investing in intraoral cameras or whatever you might sell, right? When you're talking with visitors in the booth, ask about, hey, when you evaluate this type of product or this type of service, what are the 2 or 3 most important factors or things you tend to look at? So just ask the visitor about purchase criteria and make sure you can deliver. that information right on the spot. Your staff, make sure you've got knowledgeable staff in the booth and that they're available to answer questions on the spot. One of the best practices I would share here is to take a look at your products, your services, and ask your team, what are the top 5 questions that we get hit with over and over again, and script the answers out and spoon feed those answers to your booth staff, whether it's in a printed document or 3x5 cards or it's an electronic document, but make sure your staff can answer the questions on the spot. And use a consultative sales approach. You don't want to go in and just start talking about your product, your service. You want to ask situational questions about how are you doing this now? What's working? What do you see as the problems or the pain points? And need-based questions to try to find out, how to position your product or your service, that it ties into a stated need that the visitor has. So you want to be less product focused and more customer focused. And you don't want to go quick into product presentations without taking time to know who you're with, why they're visiting your booth, what they're doing now in this area, how they feel it's working, and what are the bottlenecks or the pain points or the roadblocks, or how could this be done better? And listen carefully when you're asking these questions in the booth. You'll gain a lot of, again, credibility and trust and understanding. An old saying I heard years ago is, many times people will make a buying decision in your favor, not because they understand everything there is to understand about you, your company, your product, but more because they feel you understand them, the power of understanding. So there's some really good takeaways in these. How do we better meet these learning and shopping needs? And my advice to you would be, we're recording this webinar, so I would suggest that you, when we get it up on the Exhibitor ROI Center, maybe get your team together after this webinar and have them view that and really step back and look at what you're doing and what you can change and how you can make it better. So let's kind of move into, it's like peeling an onion here, if you will. Let's move into the impact of in-booth demonstrations and presentations. There was a study done a few years ago by CEIR, Center for Exhibition Industry Research, and it found that the number one way that attendees want to engage with exhibits on show floors is through interactive demonstrations and presentations. And that having a well-planned one can increase leads, awareness, and influence purchasing and influence opinions. And that over half of attendees say that the number one reason they remember an exhibit they visited is because it had an interactive presentation or demonstration in the booth. So some of you listening to me today have a lot of products. You've got maybe multiple services. And sometimes we try to cram too much stuff in the booth and we lack a focal point or a hook. So when you have multiple products or services or things that you do, there's a hierarchy when it comes to trade shows. So number one is lead with new. I mentioned that before. If it's new, it's news. If it's new, it is magnetic in its ability to attract attendees. So as you look at all your different products, the first question you should ask, what's new or what's new about our products? That is your hook or your lead. Second is any product or service that directly speaks to a top of the mind need, problem, issue, or concern. And again, this could come down to insurance, this could come down to city, state, or government, or federal legislation, regulations. It could come down to OSHA. It could come down to anything, any of these governing bodies that create these rules and regulations that dental practices have to follow. So that's your second thing. Which of our solutions really speak to a top of the mind, trending, hot, buzzing, problem, issue, or need? And then the third thing in terms of the hierarchy is your bread and butter products. You know, in most businesses, if you have multiple product lines, the 80-20 rule is probably in play. 80% of your revenue is coming from 20% of your products. So you always want to reinforce your market position on your bread and butter products. So that's the hierarchy. Lead with new, augment with hot, trending, topical, top of the mind, fill it in with bread and butter, leave everything else at home. You can cross-sell all that stuff, but you don't need it all in your booth. Remember this phrase when it comes to an exhibit: less is more when it comes to your exhibit. Okay, now let's talk about some different strategies that you can deploy as you start to think about, okay, who is my target customer? What are my product services? Which are new? Which address the top of the mind? You know, what needs or problems do they address? How specifically does this product or service address it? What are the top 3 things that we want somebody to know about it? All these major questions you got to be asking. So prove your claims, okay? If you say that your product or service does something, can you demonstrate it? Can you prove it through a demonstration? For many of you, it's about differentiating your product. Maybe they're already buying something that you sell from somebody else. And so now it becomes the most wanted difference in demonstrating that. Recreating clinical or practice management or staff engagement scenarios or experiences or situations. Okay, so maybe you sell like staff training for the front desk. And maybe what you're going to recreate in the booth is a video experience that shows a really bad patient engagement right at the, you know, when they come into the practice. And maybe you're going to say, hey, there are 10 things wrong with this. In this 90-second video, there are 10 big mistakes being made. How many can you spot, right? And that's really fun, really engaging stuff, right? Before and after is always a great way to do it. Before and after. Here's how it works before, here's how it works after. Old way versus new way. Old way, new way. Another great demonstration strategy. Speaking to the multiple buying influences in the practice, you've got, assistants and hygienists, dentists, and you've got practice managers. And probably one of the biggest mistakes I see at dental shows is underestimating the influence of assistants and hygienists. Years back in the 90s, I worked with a company when intraoral cameras were first being introduced to the market. And we got it very quickly that if we would engage the assistants and hygienists and get them excited about it, they would go bring the dentist back to the booth. So do not underestimate the influence based on the job function. Now, obviously, some things may or may not apply to them. But if it applies to them, design your presentation to speak to the user, the influencer, and the decision maker. Challenge their knowledge and skill and make them guess to learn and sometimes win. Take the 60-second hygienist challenge. How many questions can you get right in 60 seconds? This could be an interactive touchscreen. Making people guess to learn and also win things. Providing unique, fun, or comfortable places where the presentation demonstration takes place. And integrating technology into the presentation. Okay, so here's an example here of really challenging attendees' knowledge. Notice this banner. I saw this at the orthopedic show when I was in Chicago, and they did a brilliant job with this. It said, additive poly, ask the question. So what they're doing is challenging your knowledge. Everyone knows what's being added, but what's being taken away. Find the answers at our booth. I went by this booth 4 times during the show. It was elbow to elbow with orthopedic surgeons every time I went by the booth. They really pressed a hot button. And not only did they do it with a copy, but the whole experience. Here's an example of proving your claim. So this was a company that has a roofing compound that keeps the temperature in the attic lower. So rather than just say it did this, they did a a scale model of 3 little buildings with a heat lamp, and they had their product and their top 2 competitive products, and they had a digital thermometer that was tracking the heat inside of the little house. This is a prove your claims, and this is also a demonstrate your key difference. Here's an example of comfortable place for the presentation. This is really unique, but look what's happening. The guys presenting, there are three attendees there in this, and this is in a 10 by 10 booth. So there's a lot of different ways to approach building your demonstration presentation. And I can't tell any one of you without talking to you what's right for you. So I'm really giving you a very large overview, and then hopefully you're going to grab onto those. Oh, this one makes sense for me. Let me try that. Those of you that provide services, you don't have a physical product, it takes a little more thought, it takes a little more creativity. I would start with identifying problems that you solve and opportunities you create, savings and efficiencies, okay? I would focus my presentation on primarily on the results that they get, and I wouldn't get super deep into the methodology or how they do that. Now I'd go, hey, Dr. Jones, on a typical day, how much time are you spending prescribing treatment to your patients? And what if you could cut that time in half? What would that mean to your practice in terms of the number of patients, in terms of revenue, in terms of profitability? And then I would focus my presentation around that. And there's a lot of different strategies that you can use, within presenting a service. I mentioned some of you do finance, maybe business or equipment financing. So for you, a great presentation might be, the 3 biggest capital equipment mistakes that dental practices make and how to avoid them. The in-booth presentation would be about the advantages and the pitfalls of leasing versus financing. Be a great way to do it. Anybody who was in that financing mode would come running to that presentation because they're, should I do it this way or that way? Now, let's get into some specifics here on in-booth presentations, okay? One-to-one personalized. It's you talking to one visitor. Then you've got one-to-many, where it's you or your team talking to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, however many people. It could be a presentation. It might also be a theater. It might even be a booth tour. I'll talk about that in a moment. Interactive audio visual. So much you can do there. I'm going to show you some examples of how other companies are using AV in the booth today. Gamification is super hot, bringing a sense of fun, play, competition into it. It can be quizzes. It can be trivia based. It can be looking for, searching for this or that. I'll show you some examples here. Recreating environments, as we talked about, whether it is the check-in, the patient, desk or counter, the waiting room, the operatory, whatever, right? Takeaway content. We talked about that. This is another form of a presentation demonstration. So you can see an example here of comfortable seating, which is just doing a demonstration here. Here's an example of using an interactive touch screen, with a good header on it, so you know what's on the screen and information right there. Here's an example of a vignette of creating this is a mini recreation. So this would be a washroom or urinal, right? And see how quick, simple water conservation can be. And they recreated it in a vignette. Theater presentations. We see a fair amount of these at the CDS Midwinter meeting. If you want to see the one that people line up around the block for every year, I believe it's Colgate with the circular theater and the rising curtains that go up. And every year we're at that show, they are lined up for that presentation. So theaters don't only have to be for big booths. In this right-hand example, here's a small 10 by 20 booth, a company that does storage solutions for healthcare with a small theater. It's got 9 stools. It's got a flat panel there and room for a presenter. So theater presentations, why? They're coming to learn. What can you teach them? Here's an example of a client I worked with where we did a guided presentation. The market saw us, we were being pigeonholed. The market really didn't understand the breadth of the solutions. So we put together this Do More tour, and we aggressively promoted it. We had a live presenter who gave a quick, 2.5 minute company overview, and we walked them to 4 different product stations in the booth. We had them, there was a card, you'll see the picture of it on the screen, that we put in their hand. At each one of these stations, we had a message of something we wanted them to remember. We purposefully left a keyword off the message, so they had to fill it in. What we wanted them to do was take the high-level tour, which took about 9 minutes, and after that, we wanted them to meet with a technical expert for a deeper dive on whatever solution they had the most interest in. And we had, this was at a show in Vegas, we had over 2,000 people go through our tour. We had over 600 of them split out into one-to-one presentations with our technical experts. So one-to-many guided, almost like a tour, right? This was the Do More tour, safer, simpler, smarter. Interactive AV, again, it could be as simple as an app on a smartphone. It could be an app on an iPad or a tablet. It could be a larger touchscreen interactive. It could be augmented reality, right? This thing on the left here, this white stand with the red headphones, that's augmented reality. You put the headphones on, you pick up that literature, and as you wave it under the iPad, things start happening on the iPad. You'll see this Be Greater up on the right. This is also an interactive touchscreen with these cubes that as you drag these cubes around, different things happen. And as you can see, there's a lot you can do with AV in the booth. This is probably one of my favorites of all time. This was at the National Association of Convenience Stores. This was Coca-Cola. They built the Customize Your Cold Vault. And all they had was a large flat panels that recreated the cold vault in a C-store. And then they had a touch screen that you would tap on the demographic, who was the primary demographics in your store, and then click on the category, and the screen, the vault would change, and it would show you what to put, where to put, how much to put, and how it would impact revenue based on real-time data. And so this was super compelling. Here's another example, interestingly, another show in Chicago, where the primary message was reinforcing their position as an innovator. So what they did was had a interactive wall that was motion-based. The sensors, as you got near it and you walked toward it, you could see the innovation for the last 30 years. So the theme was 30 years of MR innovation. MRI, they do MRI systems. So each innovation was spotlighted on a card that came forward as you got near the screen. This is another example. This is self-guided. Even if a person wasn't there, you could take this experience. Gamification, again, we talked about people, sometimes it's very serious, right? They're in these scientific sessions and going up and down, and sometimes they just want a little break. And if you can build a game into what you're doing, this is an example of an in-booth presentation based on deal or no deal. So it's a great way to kind of inject messaging and yet have fun and create interaction. And people tend to get very energized, and it's super engaging as you have a game in your booth, okay? So here's an example of a company where they had the challenge, a pallet rack frame manufacturer. They really wanted to differentiate the difference between bolted frame racks versus welded. So they the interlock challenge, and they had 3 attendees come up and who could build this rack the fastest in the booth. I worked with a veterinary pharmaceutical company. We did a version of Jeopardy. We did animal health products, and we did a version of Jeopardy in the booth. And we had a team A and a team B, and we threw up questions about about the product, about the symptoms, about what made ours different. Here's an example I saw recently at a show where they used an oversized version of a Plinko game, and they really nailed this because their story was, with the mesh, which is some form of technology I don't know anything about. with a mesh, each hop is a stop. With their product, FlexNet, it goes direct to the point. So notice that is oversized Plinko and the lady up on the top. So the attendee came down on the bottom and picked a chip. And then as they were telling their story, she would hold one chip to the left and she would hold the attendee's chip over on the FlexNet side. And she would drop the two chips and they would start bouncing down. And every single time the mesh one got caught, the FlexNet one shot straight to the bottom. So they used gamification, scale, size, and interaction and fun to deliver their product story. Okay. Here's another example of integrating gamification into a touchscreen. This was from the C-Store show, the Snack Swap Challenge. I love this one. It was one of my favorites. So there would be 9 products that would appear on the screen. And it was the retailer's job to touch the 3 products that they thought were not selling well. And then a screen would pop up where they would pick 3 to replace it with. And then it would run this algorithm and it would tell them if they raised the category. The theme in the booth was elevating category growth. So the game was about the Snack Swap Challenge. And so they learned kind of how to optimize. And so these are all examples of, you can get super creative. Again, this is just a touch screen mounted to a wall. And some of you are going, well, I can't afford to do that. Well, you might be able to do it on a iPad or maybe even a smartphone if you have an app. Now you can get apps for about anything today. Recreating physical environments in the booth in terms of demonstrations. This is, you've got a medium or a large size product. You really want to deliver how it functions in the environment. So notice on the left here, this company, this was at a EMS, an emergency medical service show we did. And, the benefit, this chair, you could carry a lot of weight up the stairs real fast and easy, no matter how big you were. So what they did, they would have a staffer set in the chair, and he was a pretty large guy set in the chair, and then they would have a small staffer would demonstrate, watch how easy it is for me to pull them up steps. And then they would let attendees do it too. And wow, talk about demonstrating the product. On the right is an example of demonstrating, this is in radiology. And so they've kind of recreated a radiology lab here, and they're demonstrating he's wearing the gear that he would wear in the lab and recreating the environment. Okay, so let me catch my breath here for a minute and open it up for questions. I have thrown a lot at you quickly. What I'm going to do over the next several minutes is take you behind the thinking and the planning process on how to maybe sift through all these ideas I just threw at you and bring it to life. So if you have any questions on anything we've talked about so far, now would be a good time to go ahead and go to your queue and press submit. And while you're thinking about that, I will keep going. Okay, so time considerations. Well, it should be short enough to hold their interest, but long enough to inform. The whole cycle for an in-booth presentation is 20 minutes max. And that will include about 5 to 8 of that will be the physical engagement presentation with the visitor. Then you're going to have a couple minutes, hopefully up front or afterwards, qualify. We like to qualify up front. Maybe we'll put a card in their hand and have them fill it out before we get started. And we'll usually have crowd gatherers to keep the theater full, because we've noticed a busy presentation will stay busy, a non-busy one struggles to get busy. So you got to really promote your presentation, and you should use crowd gatherers to get people in the seats or circling around the presentation. Consistent intervals through the day. Obviously, you got to look at the peaks and valley of the show, but you might run it, top of the hour, every other hour, depending on how busy it's going. You might run it once an hour or, at the 30-minute mark. And then when there's unopposed exhibit hours, dedicated exhibiting hours, you want to increase the frequency of the demonstration or the presentation. Should get a lot more traffic during the unopposed or dedicated hours. Your main questions are going to be, who's your target audience? What are their top of the mind concerns relative to what you do? You're going to want to detail how specifically do your products or your services address those concerns. And you're going to want to find the big idea, the one key takeaway that if they remember nothing else about your presentation, that they walk away with that idea knowing. Okay, and then you just think through, what do we want them to do during the presentation? What do we want them to see? What do we want them to hear? What do we want them to do in terms of touch, push button, work with the device, take notes, whatever? And what do you want them to do after, when the presentation's over? The biggest mistake I see in a lot of in-booth presentations is they'll have a small crowd and no booth staffers engage them. People will come up, they'll watch the presentation demonstration, they'll turn around and walk out. So they obviously didn't think about, what do we want to have happen next and how do we capture information? So your questions then, okay, your 7-step process to build is, number one, you start with your setting clear objectives for the presentation. What are we trying to accomplish? Think, feel, do, both during and after, and remember, and we put it in writing. Number two, remember, it's about your audience. It's not about your products. Okay, I worked with a company that does medical records management, and before we started working together, they were going to make a big mistake. They were going to do a very technical, very dry presentation. And we made one little tweak to the presentation. We started it off with a poll. We asked, how many of you are CIO, Chief Information Officers? And what are some of the top challenges you're facing today with, medical record management? And it took about 2 or 3 minutes of getting a few of the challenges voiced from the viewers. Then we tailored the presentation to hit those challenges. It's a story. You got to think about your story, and as you build a story, you'll remember there's the typical elements are there's a hero, there's a villain, there's a conflict, and there's some form of a win, victory, or triumph. And you got to remember here, the hero is not your product, it's not your service, it's not your company. If you design it right, your hero is your customer. You can make your customer the hero of this and show them how you're facing this challenge, and here's your opposition, right? And here's the struggles you're going to go through to go from here to here. And here's how you win when you do this. Number 4, physical and mental engagement. You can't just you can't just present, but you got to really get them physically, mentally engaged. It's hard to do on webinars, but something I'm doing, you'll notice right here, is the follow along workbook. You've got the workbook with the fill in the gaps. Number 5, you got to make sure whoever's presenting it can do it with some energy and some passion and some pizzazz, right? Never be boring, rule number 5 here. Never be boring, and also keep that energy level up during the presentation. Number 6, capture. If you do a great presentation and they just walk out of the booth, you have really missed the opportunity. Number 7 is a crystal clear call to action. What do you want them to do right now in the booth, and have that planned out? Like my example in the tour was, we had them fill out a card, tear off the bottom and keep the content, drop it in a thing, and reach in their hand to draw a casino chip out. And on the card, we asked, what would you like to have next? And he said, meet with a technical expert. So we would walk them over and engage them with one of our technical experts. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here in 45 minutes. I know I've thrown a lot at you. We could probably go an hour and a half on this, but I want to really respect your time. The final points here is the number one way attendees want to engage is through interactive demonstrations and presentations. They come to trade shows to learn. They come to trade shows to network. They come to trade shows for sourcing. So if you will invest the time and the energy to develop a attractive, engaging, immersive presentation or demonstration and make it a focal point of the experience in your booth, you will have a booth full of interested, qualified buyers. You will thrust yourself into the top 10% of exhibitors in any show you exhibit at, and you'll ultimately get better ROI. Okay, so with that, I'm going to open the queue for questions. Those of you who may need to run, be sure to watch your email for the quick survey, and equally important, remember to bookmark and share the Exhibitor ROI Center link with everybody on your team, because we're just scratching the surface in terms of the content that is up there. So I'm going to take a look at the question queue. While I do, Lisa, are there any things you want to add or any closing comments on your behalf from CDS?
Well, I just want the exhibitors to know that we communicate with you primarily through email, and we have sent out a few, again, to bombard you with information. Most notably was the hotel information, which was sent out a couple of weeks ago, and then a few days ago, the a specific URL if you wanted to sign up for the complimentary lead retrieval license. Again, lead retrieval, each attendee and exhibitors will have a barcode on the badge, and by signing up for this complimentary license for lead retrieval, we will give you the capability of capturing leads at the show for post-meeting follow-up. So if you did not receive your email, please let me know and I'll be happy to resubmit it to you.
Okay, thanks, Lisa. I've got a first question I think might be in your wheelhouse. And so the question is, hi, we're from Austria. I wanted to ask if you could point us to any companies that could help us with things like desks, banners, and stuff you would use in the booth, maybe even running flat screens, flat panels.
Well, our general contractor, Freeman, will be happy to help you with your graphics. They do offer customizable booths, so you could just bring your product and have Freeman create the booth design for you. You can also use Freeman AV. These are our preferred vendors, by the way. Freeman AV, you can rent any of your flat panels, so this way, coming from Europe, you are not bringing as many heavy pieces of equipment, and you can just, with ease, travel to the United States. The service kit is currently available under the exhibitor information section on our website. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to email me and I can show you directly how to get to that section so you can order any service that you wish.
Yeah, I want to add to that. Freeman is the general service contractor, but they're a lot more than that. They've got a complete exhibit design and technology department that can work with you on a lot of the things we've talked about here. In terms of designing an experience that will really captivate attendees, and especially if you're coming from abroad, last thing you probably want to do is ship and try to get all that through customs. So they can help you really from A to Z on that. So be sure to look in the service kit, look at Freeman, reach out to them. Next question I have, I think it's in my wheelhouse. How can I show a product that is very small? How can I make it more visible? One of the coolest things you can do with a small product is have a large scale model of it built. I've been at a lot of medical shows and I've seen some, things like splints and different things that they'll insert into your body. Oversized scale models of a small product would be a really great way to go. And if you want to go to the top level on that, you could put it on a rotating base and have lighting or uplighting on it. And you could even go as far to have an interactive touchscreen, whether it's a tablet or a touchscreen, that kind of gives the drill down details of the product. So if you have a small product, create a large scale model and go big on that, because if you want to really, someone's talking about dental posts, and I see a lot of posts at the show and they are small, but make sure you go oversized and make sure you really illustrate in that example what makes your posts different, unique, or better, and that'll help you a lot. Let's see, question here. There's an idea that we should have a product range across multiple tables as opposed to single distinct areas. What's been your experience and guidance? Navigation in the booth is critical. If you're going to have, let's say you've got a bunch of instruments. If you just throw a bunch of instruments out on a table and hope that they're going to fish through it and find them, good luck. That's not going to work. So what I would do with a lot of products, I would organize them by application or type, and then I would have clear header signs so the visitor can look and see exactly what is where in your booth. Beyond what is where in the booth, I would also have either static or an AV sign that gives the top 3 messages that you want them to know about your products. So number 1, make it easy to find, put them into natural groupings or categories, separate them or have them in the logical flow. So if you have instruments that are used in a certain flow during the dental procedure, it'd be really smart to present those instruments in the natural flow of usage. Now you'll be creating that linkage to, oh, I start with this instrument, then I go to this one, then I go to this, then I go to this one. So that would be extremely helpful. And for the person who sent that, if you'll drop me an email at jefferson@tradeshowturnaround.com, I've got a couple really good photos of companies who have done that well. All right, so we are past the buzzer, but wow, thanks for showing up, everybody. We had a great turnout. Lisa, thanks to you and everybody for, again, caring enough about your exhibitors to do this. And in closing, just remember, let this be a beginning, not an end. The Exhibitor ROI Center on the screen is loaded with content. We're continually updating it. And trade shows are extremely effective, but you got to know what you're doing. And they don't teach this stuff in school. And that's why Lisa and I have been working together so many years to build this up and keep this going for you. And final point, it's not what you heard here today that matters. It's going to be what you do. So I would encourage you to, when we get the replay of this up, to view it with your team and block out an hour and a half to 2 hours over the next few weeks to sit down and how are you going to create an interactive experience that meets their learning and shopping needs. So on behalf of everyone at the Chicago Dental Society and my company here, Competitive Edge, we're so thrilled you're exhibiting with us. Tune in on our next webinar, New Exhibitors, on December 13th, and we will see you at the Midwinter meeting sooner rather than later. So thanks for logging in, everybody.